my experience, lures typically have a better action if they're longer than they are tall. They also seem to work better if they look like something a fish usually eats. But what if instead of all of that, you try to win a fish's heart? Even though every body of water within 100 miles is frozen over, I'm going to try to make the perfect fishy Valentine in this edition of the Gotta Catch 'em series. As I tried not to think about how what I've created looks like a cutout of sugar cookie dough, I drew some lines to serve as guides for carving the chamfers. I probably could have just sanded the corners round instead of carving, but marking and carving allowed me to get a more uniform shape that I could then refine later with some sandpaper. I used the width of the body and a stencil to sketch the shape of a rounded lip on a sheet of polycarbonate. And I cut it out on the bandsaw, leaving enough room around my lines to let me shape it with a file. Before shaping the lip, I pressed it into the squishy balsa to help me mark where I was going to cut the lip slot. I drew some lines to help me know how deep to cut, then used a pull saw to do the deed. My cut was just a hair too tight though, so I used some coarse sandpaper to widen it just enough for a tight fit. With the major wood removal done, it was time to finish shaping the body with a foam sanding block. Once I was happy with the shape, I went over it a few more times with progressively finer grits of sandpaper to end up with this smooth finish. I cut a piece from my coil of lock wire and spun it in the drill to straighten it out so it was ready to start bending up the hardware. Since I'm working with balsa wood, I'm using a through wire setup so I don't have to trust a soft wood to securely hold a screw eye. For balsa lures like this that only have a line tie and a single hook hanger, I like to use the lazy method of drilling a couple of pilot holes and trying to connect them by jamming the wire from one side to the other. As usual, my aim was a bit off, but at least I didn't have to fill in a slot spanning the whole length of the lure. After I finished wrapping up the hook hanger, I superglued the wire into its permanent home and proceeded to bathe the rest of it to seal the wood and add some much needed strength. Then I used a file to shape the lip while the glue finished drying. I don't have much experience with tall balsa lures like this, so I wasn't quite sure how best to add the weight. Either way, I knew it needed to go in the belly somewhere, so I started drilling holes. In hindsight, I wish I would have added more weight. I would probably put it above the hook hanger so I could leverage some of that weight against the lip. Either way, there's nothing I can do about it now, so I gotta wait before adding any lead, that way I can make sure I added enough to make it sink. I'm going to use this part of the video as a PSA to remind everyone to clean out all the dust from your lead holes before adding any molten metal. Yep, this was enough to get it to sink, so I proceeded to fill the rest of the lead hole with super glue and baking soda. When using this method to fill gaps, it's best to use multiple thin layers to make sure it leaves a smooth surface. Otherwise, you can create tiny pinholes, and those will definitely show up later in your paint. To smooth out the super glue and baking soda, I used a small file to make sure I sanded as little of the surrounding wood as possible. The super glue and baking soda is much harder than balsa, so sanding everything together will remove a lot more wood than you want. You'll still need sandpaper eventually though, so once the baking soda was even with the wood, I worked through various grits to achieve a finish smooth enough for paint. This build was going to get all light shades of paint, so I had to use white for the base layer. A perk of working in a frigid garage is a convenient space heater that you can use to help the paint layers dry faster, so I didn't have to wait too long to add the next light pink coat. I used a small tube of masking tape to mark off the mouth and sprayed a darker pink layer over the rest of the lure. This was the last I'd need of the airbrush, so I was able to remove the masking once it dried. The rest of the paint job was just a series of dots to make the dots, which had it looking pretty good already. Then all that was left was a thin strip for the mouth. I think I got pretty close to the character model with this one. Each reference picture I found seemed to use slightly different shades of pink though, so I wasn't super concerned with nailing the color. The main thing I wanted to accomplish was having a good contrast between the light and dark shades of pink, and I was pleased enough with how this turned out. I was less pleased though with my attempt at a heart-shaped lip. I've never seen another one shaped like this, so I wasn't sure how it would affect the action in the water. But I think a shorter and wider lip would have been a little better match for how I made the rest of the lure. But let's face it, this whole project was a bigger gimmick than Z moves, so I can't be too upset if it doesn't have perfect action. As you can see, this is one of those tall lures that acts more like a rudder than a crankbait and tends to veer to one side on a fast retrieve. That said, with a little practice, I was able to get a little bit better action out of it with the right line angle and retrieve speed, so I think I might be able to make it work in an actual pond. We'll find out this spring. If you like this sort of thing, check out the Gotta Catch 'em playlist here, and consider subscribing if you'd like to be notified when I release future videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.